The snow had been falling since noon. By 7 o'clock it had buried the gutters and softened the edges of Aspen Hollow until the whole town looked like something pressed between the pages of an old storybook. The street lamps on Caldwell Avenue cast low amber cones through the white, and the storefronts, most of them shuttered for the Tuesday night, held only the memory of afternoon foot traffic, their windows fogged and dark. Ethan Miller noticed none of it. He was looking at Lily. She had her face pressed sideways against the passenger window of the truck, her breath leaving small ghost circles on the glass, her mitten-covered hand dragging a slow arc through the condensation. 7 years old, she had the particular economy of movement that children get when they are trying very hard to contain excitement, a tight-wound stillness that vibrated at the edges. "Is it far?" she asked, for the third time. 2 blocks. How far is 2 blocks in minutes? About 2 minutes. She exhaled like someone who had been told they were almost at the top of a very long staircase. Ethan parked the truck on the side street behind Little Verona Trattoria and cut the engine. In the sudden quiet, he could hear the snow, not the sound of it falling, which had no sound, but the sound of the world it made, muffled and thick and close, as if the night had drawn in around them. He checked the clock on the dash. 7:08 p.m. The reservation was for 7, but he'd called ahead, and Marco at the front desk had told him not to worry. He came around to Lily's door and helped her down. Her boots hit the snow with a soft crunch. She was wearing her good dress, the burgundy one, with the white collar that her aunt had sent for Christmas, and over it the blue parka that was one size too large because he'd bought it with next winter in mind. Her hair was in 2 French braids, which had taken him 40 minutes and 3 online tutorials to achieve. One was slightly tighter than the other. He'd noticed, but Lily hadn't mentioned it, and he'd decided that meant it was fine. She took his hand. "Dad," she said, looking up at the sign above the door. Little Verona Trattoria, painted in dark red letters on cream. "Is this where Mom's favorite song is from?" He looked at her. "What song?" "Volare." "You said she loved that song." He hadn't remembered saying that, but it sounded like something he would have said. In one of those late nights when they sat at the kitchen table and he tried to fill in the shape of a woman. Lily was only just beginning to understand she missed. "Yeah," he said. "That's the one." She seemed satisfied. She pulled open the door. The warmth hit them both, warm bread and garlic, and the low murmur of other people's evenings, and Lily stepped forward into it like she was stepping into water. Ethan followed her, blinking in the candlelight, and felt, very briefly and without warning, the particular ache of bringing someone to a place for the first time that you had been to before in a different life. It had been 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days since Sarah died. Today would have been their 10th anniversary. He had not told Lily that part. The Zurcher Keymiller and Sons Auto Repair. Though the Sons was now only Ethan sat at the edge of the industrial quarter on the south end of Aspen Hollow, a low cinder block building with a rusted roll-up door and a parking lot that gravel kept trying to escape from. Ethan had been working there since he was 19, starting as a general laborer for his father, and staying on long after his father retired to Phoenix and left him the business in a handshake arrangement that had eventually become a real lease. The shop had been good to him. Not lavish, but reliable, the way a draft horse is reliable, steady and unromantic and present. 3 mechanics had passed through over the years. Right now it was just him and a part-timer named Jake who came in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The winter had slowed things down, as winters always did. But it had also brought a run of bad luck with their lift compressor and a water heater that had decided November was the right time to give up entirely. He'd been working extra hours since October. 6 days a week, sometimes 7, the kind of schedule that leaves you hollowed out by Friday but fills in again over the weekend when Lily wakes you up to ask about something she read in a library book. She asked a lot of questions. This was something he'd come to understand was not a phase. The house they rented on Fletcher Street was a 2-bedroom craftsman that had been built in 1941 and had been slowly, peacefully declining ever since. The siding needed paint. The furnace had been repaired twice in the past year and would need to be replaced before the next winter, a fact that sat in the back of Ethan's mind like a stone in a shoe. The kitchen faucet had a slow drip that he'd learned to tune out. The third step from the bottom of the staircase creaked, which had at one point been annoying and had since become something he associated with home. He had learned, over the past 2 years, to do a great many things he had not known how to do. He had learned to braid hair badly at first, then adequately, then well enough that Lily had started requesting specific styles from a book she'd checked out of the school library. He had learned to sew a button and hem a dress and remove a grass stain from white cotton. He had learned to read a fever with the back of his hand before reaching for the thermometer. He had learned the specific vocabulary of a 7-year-old's social life who was kind, who was unkind, who had said something on the bus that still mattered a week later. He had learned, most importantly, that Lily was watching him, not in the self-conscious way children sometimes watch, not with the calculating gaze of a kid looking for weakness or leverage. She was watching the way people watch someone they are trying to learn from. She cataloged his habits, the way he made coffee before 6 in the morning, the way he folded laundry while listening to the radio, the way he said a quiet thing over dinner when he was tired, and the way he laughed, sudden and unguarded, when she said something he hadn't expected. He didn't know what she was assembling from all of this. He hoped it was something useful. "She talks about you a lot at school," her teacher, Mrs. Hargrove, had told him in October, during parent-teacher conferences. "She told the class that you know how to fix anything." He'd laughed a little at that. "I fix cars," he'd said. "That's a very specific set of things." Mrs. Hargrove had smiled in a way that suggested she thought he was underselling himself. The night of the dinner, he had changed out of his work clothes in the shop bathroom, standing in front of the small mirror above the sink, and looked at himself with the particular neutrality of a man who has stopped being surprised by the distance between what he'd imagined his life would look like and what it actually looked like. He was 34. He had calloused hands and a permanent faint smell of motor oil that no soap entirely removed, and the particular solidity of someone who uses his body for work. His dress shirt, the dark blue one, Sarah's favorite, was clean and pressed, though the collar was slightly stiff in the way of shirts that are washed too infrequently to soften. He had looked at himself for a long moment, then turned off the light and gone to pick up Lily. Charlotte Beaumont had been standing outside the Highlands Grand for 11 minutes when she made the decision. Inside, the annual Aspen Hollow Winter Gala was in its second hour. 240 people were seated at $10,000 tables eating duck confit and talking about deals that would be formalized in other cities in other months, and the whole thing had the polished, pressurized quality of a room in which everyone was performing a slightly more successful version of themselves. Charlotte had attended this event for the past 5 years as a representative of Beaumont Capital, first as an observer, then as a presenter, now as the primary heir and presumptive future head of the firm. She was 29 years old, and she had been attending events like this since she was 17. That was, she thought, perhaps the problem. She had told the driver she needed air. This was true, in the sense that she needed to be somewhere the air was not recycled through a grand ballroom and scented with other people's ambition. She had walked past the valet, past the stone planters that flanked the entrance, and out to the edge of the hotel's front drive, where the snow was falling with the silent indifference of weather that owes no one anything. She was not dressed for it. She was wearing a slate-gray slip dress and heeled boots and a coat that was elegant and not very warm. And within 2 minutes the cold had moved through her in that particular way of mountain cold, not gradually, but all at once, like a door opening onto a room you hadn't expected. She found she didn't mind. Charlotte had grown up in a house in Connecticut that was large enough to contain several unrelated silences simultaneously. Her father, William Beaumont, was the kind of man who shook hands with everyone and looked no one in the eye for more than 3 seconds, a habit of authority that she had once admired and now found difficult to be in the same room with. Her mother, Diane, had the composed beauty of a woman who had learned early that her primary professional skill was her composure, and had never been encouraged to develop another one. There had been nannies. There had been schools in Switzerland and Boston and London. There had been birthdays attended by the children of other wealthy people, structured and supervised and devoid of the kind of chaos that makes a birthday feel like a birthday. There had been dinners that were business meetings with cutlery, where the talk was of markets and acquisitions and the careful management of wealth across generations, and where the asking of an irrelevant question, a question about a movie or a song, or what it was like to be a child, could be absorbed and redirected so smoothly that you weren't quite sure whether you'd asked it at all. She had been, her father once told her, a very sensible child. She had taken this as a compliment for years. She was no longer sure it had been one. She stood in the snow outside the Highlands Grand and looked down Caldwell Avenue and saw, 2 blocks south, the warm lit windows of a small restaurant she had never noticed before. A red sign, white letters. She had read enough Italian to understand that trattoria meant something like informal, something like simple, something like a place where the food is the point. She walked toward it. Later, she would not be able to say exactly what she was looking for. Something real was the closest she could get, which was an embarrassing thing to think, she recognized, because it implied that everything she'd spent the evening surrounded by was not real, and that was both dramatic and probably unfair to the 240 people she'd left at their tables. But there it was. She wanted something that was what it appeared to be. She wanted a room that was not performing itself. She pushed open the door of Little Verona Trattoria and went inside. She saw them immediately. Not because they were conspicuous, they were, in fact, among the least conspicuous people in the restaurant. A man and a small girl at a table near the wall, neither of them animated in the way that draws the eye. It was something else, a quality of stillness, perhaps, or perhaps it was simply that Charlotte had just come from a room full of people who were all angled slightly outward, performing for the room. And these two were angled entirely toward each other as if the room did not exist. She was seated at a small table by the window, close enough to observe without intention. The man was mid-30s, dark-haired, broad-shouldered in the way of someone who works physically and not in a gym. He was wearing a blue dress shirt that fit him well in the shoulders and slightly awkwardly everywhere else, the collar slightly stiff, the sleeves rolled to the forearm, with the automatic gesture of someone who had spent the day with his hands in work. He had the particular quality of a person who does not think about how he looks, which was a quality Charlotte had rarely encountered in the past decade. The girl was 7 or 8 small, serious-faced, with 2 French braids and a burgundy dress, and the kind of self-possessed poise that some children have when they have been trusted with the responsibility of their own dignity. She was studying the menu with the concentration of someone reviewing a legal document. Charlotte watched the man. She watched him reach under the table casually, with the practiced naturalness of someone performing a habitual act, and she understood, without needing to see it clearly, what he was doing. He was counting bills, the movement of his jaw, the brief stillness of his eyes as they stopped tracking the room, the way he replaced his hand on top of the table with a small, contained exhale. She had grown up around enough financial anxiety to recognize its private grammar, even when everything above the table was composed. He ordered water for himself. The girl got lemonade and a basket of bread and studied the pasta section with an intensity that Charlotte found, unexpectedly, moving. "The spaghetti," the girl announced, with the gravity of a verdict. "Good choice," the man said. "Is it really? It's what your mom always ordered." The girl absorbed this. Charlotte watched the small adjustment that crossed the child's face, a tightening, a release, the way a sail fills and settles when the wind shifts. Then Lily looked back down at the breadbasket and said, with careful brightness, "Then it's definitely the right choice." The man looked at his daughter for a long moment, and in his face Charlotte saw something that she did not have a word for. Exactly. It was not sadness, though it contained sadness. It was the particular expression of a person who is carrying a weight that is also precious, who would not set it down, even if they could. They ate. The girl narrated her meal in small bursts, The bread was the best bread. The lemonade tasted like actual lemons, and not the powder kind. The spaghetti, when it arrived, was so long she had to tilt her head. The man listened to everything. He laughed at the right moments. He tucked a paper napkin into the neck of her dress with a casualness that suggested it was a regular practice, and she accepted it without interrupting her monologue. At one point, the sauce reached the corner of her mouth, and he leaned across the table with his own napkin and wiped it with the same economy of motion he might have used to tighten a bolt, automatic, precise, done without comment. "Dad?" Lily said, mid-spaghetti, with the strand still dangling. "Is this the best night?" He looked at her steadily. "Yeah," he said. "It's pretty close. Mom would have liked it here. She would have. She would have ordered the spaghetti. She would have. And she would have stolen your bread." He laughed at that genuinely. Suddenly, the way people laugh when they've been caught off guard by something true, and the sound of it reached Charlotte across the room and sat in her chest in a way she could not have explained. "She absolutely would have," he said. Charlotte looked at the half-finished glass of sparkling water in front of her and thought about her own parents, who had taken her to restaurants like this approximately never. She thought about dinners in Connecticut with the chandelier lit and the staff moving silently, and her father talking on his phone in the kitchen while the food went cold, and her mother eating with the contained composure of someone who had accepted this a long time ago. She thought about all the things she had been given and all the things she had not. The first time Charlotte had understood that her family was wealthy, she had been 6 years old. Not in the abstract sense, she had always known in the abstract sense. The way children know things that are simply true about their landscape. She'd known in the concrete sense on a Tuesday afternoon when she had been taken from school early to attend a reception at a museum her father had funded. And a classmate had seen her in the car and said, with the flat, factual delivery of children, "Your dad bought that museum." And Charlotte had looked at the building, which was large and stone-faced and permanent, and understood for the first time that permanence was something you could purchase. It had not made her happy. It had not made her unhappy. It had made her careful. She had been careful ever since. Careful at school, where she was diligent but not showy, because her father had told her that showing off was the mark of a person who needed to be seen. Careful at university, where she had studied economics and organizational theory and graduated second in her class, not first, because first would have attracted profiles in student newspapers, and Beaumont Capital had a policy about profiles. Careful at the firm, where she had worked for 4 years in a position that was officially an associate role and was actually a 12-year apprenticeship in the management of other people's expectations. She had never brought a boyfriend home. She had never told her father she didn't want to run the firm. She had never said, aloud to anyone who could hear her, "I don't know what I want, but I don't think it's this." Instead, she had gone to galas. She had sat on the boards of foundations that did good work in the service of also generating good optics. She had written checks, very large checks, to very good organizations with the signature of someone fulfilling an obligation. The money had moved in the world. She was not sure she had. She watched the man across the room take the bill from the server, glance at it with the brief, private calculation of someone doing math under pressure, and then look up and smile at his daughter as if nothing had happened. Lily was telling him about a book she was reading. Something about birds, migration patterns, or maybe it was about a girl who talked to birds. Charlotte couldn't quite hear, but she could hear the register of it, the rising inflection of a child who believes, without any evidence to the contrary, that she is being listened to. And she could see in the man's posture the slight lean forward, the small nods, the eyes that tracked her face that she was right. Charlotte had not felt listened to in so long that she had forgotten it was something she missed. She flagged down her server, a young woman named Grace, who had introduced herself when she brought the menu and asked, quietly, to see the manager. The manager's name was Donovan Reese, and he was the kind of person who had been running a small restaurant long enough to have seen most of the ways humans surprise each other. He was 52, stocky, with a gray beard and the unhurried manner of someone who knows that most urgencies in a dining room are not, in fact, emergencies. He came to Charlotte's table with the careful neutrality of a man who had learned not to assume. "Thank you for coming over," she said, keeping her voice low. "I'd like to handle the bill for the table by the wall, the man, and the little girl." Donovan glanced toward Ethan and Lily without turning his head, a skill developed over decades. "Of course," he said. "I'd like to do something else as well." She paused. She had been forming this thought for the past 20 minutes and was still not sure she had the precise shape of it right. "I'd like to set up an educational account for the child. I work with a foundation. There are mechanisms for this that are clean and uncomplicated, but that will take a few days to arrange." She looked at him steadily. "Tonight, I'd simply like him to leave with a letter and a phone number, my attorney's number. If he chooses to follow up, the account will be established. If he doesn't, that's the end of it." Donovan was quiet for a moment. He had seen, over the years, a variety of generosities: the anonymous cocktail sent across a bar, the paid-forward coffee, the occasional stranger who covered a table's meal because something about them had struck a chord. He had not seen anything quite like this. "Do you want them to know who it's from?" he asked. "No." She thought about it for a second. "Tell them it's from someone who was reminded tonight of what matters most." "That's enough." He nodded slowly. "There's one more thing," she said. She removed a card from her coat pocket, not a business card, a simple white card with a handwritten note on it, and held it out to him. "Give him this with the envelope. He doesn't have to read it here, but I want him to have it." Donovan took the card. He did not read it. That was not his function. "I'll take care of it," he said. Charlotte sat back. Outside the window, the snow was still falling steady and without urgency. The kind of snow that is not going anywhere. She thought about the phone call she was going to make tomorrow morning, and the call she would need to make to Henry Caldwell, her attorney, who had known her since she was 12 and whom she trusted more than any other person she employed, which was saying something. She thought about what it would mean to do this not once, but regularly. Not in the way she had been doing things, the signed checks, the board seats, the foundations that did good work for good optics, but in this way, quietly, specifically, for a single child in a small restaurant on a Tuesday night in Aspen Hollow, Colorado, because her father had loved her mother and her mother had ordered spaghetti. She thought it might be the most honest thing she had ever done. She paid her own bill, which was $17 for sparkling water and a bowl of ribolita she had barely touched, and which she left a $60 tip on, put on her coat, and walked back out into the snow. She did not look back at the table by the wall. She didn't need to. She had already seen what she needed to see. Ethan called for the check at 8:45. Lily had finished her spaghetti, and then, through a combination of charm and strategic deployment of large eyes, had secured a scoop of the house gelato, which she was eating with the methodical focus of someone who intends to extract maximum value from every cubic centimeter. She had settled into a post-dinner contentment that expressed itself as a loose, warm weight against his arm. Her braids slightly disheveled now, the white collar of her dress bearing the evidence of the evening in small, red-orange traces. He loved her so comprehensively in this moment that it was almost frightening. The server, Grace, she'd said, came to the table with a small tray and a white envelope. "Your bill has been taken care of," she said, with the careful tone of someone delivering news they've been coached on. Ethan looked at her. "By who?" "Someone who was eating here earlier. They asked us not to say who." She set the envelope down on the table. "They left this for you." He stared at the envelope for a moment. "Dad," said Lily, without looking up from the gelato. "Is it a treasure map?" "I don't think so," he said. He picked it up. It was a standard white envelope, unsealed, with nothing written on the outside. Inside there were two things: a folded note on the restaurant stationery, which he understood Donovan must have written at someone's direction, and a smaller card, plain white, slightly higher quality paper with a handwritten note. He read the note on the restaurant stationery first. It said, There is an educational fund that has been established in your daughter's name. The details will be communicated through the attorney at the number below. Nothing is required of you except that you call if you choose to. The only condition is that when the time comes, she passes the kindness forward. There was a phone number, a local Colorado area code. He read it twice. Then he put it down and picked up the smaller card. The handwriting was clean and slightly formal, the handwriting of someone who had been taught penmanship at a school that took such things seriously. It said, "Your daughter looked at you tonight the way I always wanted to look at someone. She is very lucky, and so are you. What you are giving her cannot be purchased. But what she will need, I can help with. A friend you haven't met yet." And then, beneath that, in smaller letters, "She would be proud of you both." Ethan sat very still. He did not know how whoever had written this knew about Sarah. He supposed they couldn't have known, not specifically, not her name or the date or the particular weight of this particular Tuesday. They must have inferred, from the way he and Lily were together, the shape of something missing. They had been right. Lily had finished the gelato. She was watching him with the particular attention of a child who has noticed that an adult is feeling something. "Dad?" He looked at her. He folded the note carefully, put it back in the envelope, and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Then he stood up, and because there was no other way to hold what he was feeling, he crouched down beside her chair and wrapped his arms around her. There, in the middle of Little Verona, Trattoria, with the candles burning and the other tables talking and the snow still coming down outside, she hugged him back immediately and without question, her arms around his neck, her face against his shoulder. "It's okay," she said quietly, with the confidence of someone who has decided to be the steady one. "It's okay, Dad." He held on for a long moment. "Yeah," he said, "it really is." Henry Caldwell had been Charlotte Beaumont's attorney for 17 years. He had been her father's attorney before that, and his father's attorney before that, which made him a kind of institutional continuity in a family that changed everything else with each generation. He was 61, thin, with the slight stoop of a tall man who has spent decades in low-ceilinged conference rooms, and he had the rare quality of listening with his whole face, a habit that had served him well in rooms where the most important things were often the things no one said directly. Charlotte called him at 8 in the morning. "I need to set up a foundation," she told him. "Independent of Beaumont Capital. No board with family members, no PR arrangement, no profile. Something that operates quietly." There was a brief pause, not the pause of surprise, but the pause of a man organizing the next 90 minutes of his day. "What's the scope?" he asked. "Educational funding, initially. Specific beneficiaries identified through direct observation, not application processes. I'll be the sole trustee. I want it structured so that recipients have no obligation to the organization publicly, only to a pay-it-forward condition in their eventual work or community." Another pause. "That's doable. Unusual, but doable. Good." She was standing at her hotel window, looking out at the town she'd grown up visiting. The snow had stopped in the night, and the morning was sharp and white, the mountains visible above the rooftops in the particular clarity that follows a storm. "There's one beneficiary already, a child in this town. Her father's name is Ethan Miller. I'll send you what I have. I want the communication to come from your office. I want no line of connection back to me. Are you certain?" Henry asked. This was a question he asked whenever she was doing something her father would not have done, which was a useful barometer. "Yes. All right. I'll have a structure by the end of the week. Thank you, Henry." She hung up. She stood at the window for a long moment, watching a delivery truck make its careful way down the snow-packed street below. She had spent the night in the hotel room rather than flying back to Denver as planned, and she was not certain whether that was because of the snow or because she had needed to be near something she couldn't name quite yet. She thought about the name she was going to give the foundation. Not something architectural, not something that gestured at wealth or longevity or institutional permanence. something that meant what it meant. She had decided, somewhere around 3 in the morning, that it would be called the Present Moment Foundation, because that was what she had been given. In a small restaurant on a Tuesday night in the snow, not a vision of the future, not a strategy, not a plan, just a moment, fully inhabited, that had shown her what she was missing. She thought that was a thing worth naming. The letter from Henry Caldwell's office arrived at the Fletcher Street house on a Thursday afternoon, 14 days after the dinner at Little Verona Trattoria. Ethan read it standing at the kitchen counter, still in his work clothes. With the quiet of the house around him, Lily was at school. He had come home to swap out a part he'd left in the garage. The letter was 2 pages, clear and formal, explaining that an educational trust had been established in the name of Lily Marie Miller and outlining its structure: full funding for private schooling through 12th grade, a university scholarship supplement, and an annual disbursement for educational materials, tutoring, and extracurricular activities with no income assessment and no application requirement. The only condition, stated at the bottom of the second page in the same clean, formal language, was this: when Lily reached adulthood and established herself in her chosen field, she was asked, not required, asked to find one person in her community whose potential exceeded their means, and to help. He called Henry Caldwell's office the following Monday. He had spent the weekend thinking. He was not, by nature, a person who accepted things without understanding them. He had questions about the legal structure, about what precisely was expected of him as a parent, about whether he was being asked to give up any parental rights or decision-making authority over his daughter's education. Henry answered all of them patiently and precisely, and at the end of the call, Ethan asked the one question he had been building toward. "Who is this?" "I'm not able to say," Henry told him. "Can you tell me why?" A brief pause. "I think they just wanted to help, without it becoming something else." Ethan thought about this for a long time. Then he enrolled Lily at Ridgecrest Academy, which was 12 miles from Aspen Hollow, and had a science program that her teacher, Mrs. Hargrove, had mentioned twice in 2 conferences as the best in the region. She started in September. She cried for 3 days before the start of school because she was nervous, and then she came home from the first day and told him about a girl named Sophie Wren who sat next to her and knew all the capitals of all the countries and wanted to be an astronaut. And after that, she did not cry about school again. She thrived. There was no other word for it. She grew into herself with the particular velocity of a child who has been given enough room and enough stability to simply develop. She was, as her teachers reported year after year, curious without being restless, diligent without being anxious, and possessed of a quality of genuine engagement, the ability to be interested in things for their own sake that was unusual in a way that suggested it had been modeled for her, at close range, for a long time. Ethan watched this happen with the slightly dazed wonder of someone who has planted a seed in winter and is only now, in late spring, understanding what they actually planted. His own life changed in smaller, quieter ways. The shop did well enough. He took on a second mechanic, a woman named Priya Sandhu, who had moved to Aspen Hollow from Denver, and who turned out to be better with electrical systems than anyone he'd ever worked with. They developed the comfortable professional shorthand of people who spend most of their days in the same building, doing different parts of the same work. Jake stayed on as the part-timer. The furnace was replaced. The faucet was fixed. The third step still creaked. He did not date. He wasn't opposed to it in principle. He simply found that the life he'd constructed had a particular texture and weight that he was unwilling to disturb without a very good reason. He went to Lily's school events. He attended a parents' reading group that met on the second Tuesday of every month, initially because Lily asked him to, and eventually because he found he looked forward to it. He learned, over those years, the particular pleasure of being known in a small town, not famous, not remarkable, simply known, the way a stone is known in the water that has moved around it for a long time. Lily graduated from Ridgecrest Academy with the highest grade point average in her class. The summer after graduation, she sat on the steps of the Fletcher Street house in the long light of a July evening and said to him, "I want to study biochemistry, and then I want to do pediatric research. I want to figure out things that are wrong with children and then fix them." He looked at her. "That's very specific," he said. "I've been thinking about it since I was 12. What happened when you were 12? She thought about it. "Sophie Wren's little brother got sick," she said. "He had to go to the hospital for a long time. I went with Sophie once to visit him. He was 5, and he was scared. And there wasn't enough, I don't know. There wasn't enough of the right kind of attention." She paused. I thought, someone should fix that. And then I thought, why not me? He didn't say anything. He put his arm around her. She went to the University of Colorado for her undergraduate degree, then to Johns Hopkins for her doctoral work. She published her first research paper at 26, a study on early biomarkers for pediatric autoimmune disorders, and it was cited 11 times in its first year. She was not the kind of scientist who became famous. She was the kind who became necessary, which is a different thing and lasts longer. She never forgot the letter. Not the legal letter she had read that once and filed it. She had memorized the small white card, the handwriting on it, the particular weight of the sentence. What you are giving her cannot be purchased. She had thought about whoever had written it more times than she could count. She had wondered, over the years, whether they were alive or gone, near or far, changed or the same. She did not know. She had only the fact of them, the shape of their generosity, clean-edged and anonymous, with no handle for gratitude to grab onto. She had come to think that might have been the point. When she was 31, she gave her first full lecture at a medical conference in Denver. The audience was perhaps 300 clinicians and researchers. It was about something technical, biomarker panels, early intervention windows, the particular problem of funding long-term pediatric research. But at the end, she took off her reading glasses and set aside her notes and spoke for 4 minutes about something that was not in the paper. She said, "I want to tell you about a Tuesday night when I was 7 years old." She told them about the restaurant, about the spaghetti, about the small white card, about a person she had never met and would not have recognized on the street, who had seen something worth helping and had helped it. Without fanfare, without condition, without needing to be thanked. "I have spent most of my career," she said, "trying to do work that is actually useful. That means knowing what I can fix and being honest about what I can't. I can't cure everything. I can't save everyone. But I can find a child who needs someone to see them. And I can see them." She paused. "That's what she gave me, not just the funding. She gave me the knowledge that you can change someone's life by paying attention. That's all. You don't need to be powerful. You just have to notice." The room was very quiet. Then someone in the third row began to applaud, and the rest of the room followed. Charlotte had not intended to attend. She was 56 now, and she had become, over the years, a person who was careful about where she put her attention. The Beaumont Capital years were behind her. She had handed management of the firm to a board she trusted, a process that had taken 4 years and a great deal of careful conversation with her father, who had eventually, grudgingly, come to understand that his daughter had something else she wanted to do with her life. The Present Moment Foundation had grown in ways she had not planned but had not discouraged. It operated, as she had intended, quietly, no gala, no profile, no award ceremonies. It had funded 117 children over the course of 23 years in Colorado and Wyoming and Montana, through a process of careful, personal identification that took time and humility and the willingness to be wrong. Some of the beneficiaries had gone on to remarkable things. Some had gone on to ordinary things, which Charlotte had come to believe was equally important. All of them had received, along with the funding, a version of the same ask. When you can, find someone. Help them. She had heard from some of them over the years carefully, indirectly through Henry Caldwell's office. A note here, a report there. The knowledge that it had mattered. She had never heard from Ethan Miller or his daughter. This did not trouble her. She had been specific about wanting no connection. She had understood that night in the restaurant that the gift was not for her, that the moment she made it about herself, it would become something smaller and more ordinary. She had held the not knowing for 24 years, and she had found, to her own surprise, that it was something she was good at. She had come to Denver for something else entirely, a meeting with a researcher whose work on early detection she was considering funding. The conference hotel was the same building. She had seen the program in the lobby. She had seen the name, Dr. Lily Miller. Johns Hopkins. Presentation, Advances in Pediatric Autoimmune Biomarker Research. She had sat in the conference lobby for 15 minutes, looking at that name on the printed schedule. Then she had taken a seat near the back of the room. She did not know what she expected. She had told herself she was curious only in an administrative sense, a trustee reviewing outcomes, nothing more. But she was not a person who lied to herself, generally, and she recognized by the time she sat down that this was not administrative. She had wanted to see. After 24 years of not seeing, she had wanted just once to see. The woman who walked to the podium was in her early 30s. She was medium height, composed, with the particular containment of someone who is comfortable in front of a crowd without being energized by it. She had her mother's name and her father's quality of being fully present, that thing Charlotte had noticed in the restaurant. That quality of inhabiting a room without performing it. She looked like her father. Not precisely, not feature by feature, but in some quality of bearing. A steadiness. A solidity that was not rigidity but something softer. The steadiness of a person who has been well grounded from the beginning. Charlotte sat in the back row and listened. The technical content was clear and precise and addressed a problem Charlotte had read about but not understood with this degree of texture. And then Lily set down her notes, and Charlotte went very still. "I want to tell you about a Tuesday night when I was 7 years old." The room shifted. Charlotte did not move. She heard it, all of it. The restaurant. The spaghetti. The small, white card. The sentence she had written in the hotel room at midnight, sitting on the edge of the bed in her coat because she'd only just come in from the cold. "She would be proud of you both," she heard Lily say. "She gave me the knowledge that you can change someone's life by paying attention." Charlotte's hands were folded in her lap. She kept them there. She did not cry. That was not, she thought, what this moment required. What it required was presence, the same quality she had admired in the restaurant 2.5 decades ago, the same thing she had been trying, in her own way, to learn ever since. When the room began to applaud, she applauded too. Just a woman in the back row, one of 300, clapping for a scientist who had done something true. She stayed until the room began to clear. She did not introduce herself. She did not approach Lily Miller's table, where people had gathered with questions and business cards and the specific attentiveness of professional interest. She watched from the edges of the room with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has completed a thing that took a very long time. Then she put on her coat and walked out of the hotel. Outside, the December sky over Denver was a deep, particular blue that only comes on very cold, clear days, and the city was bright in the low winter sun. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing the cold air that carried in it a hint of coming snow. Not here, not today, but soon. She thought about a restaurant in Aspen Hollow, and a little girl in a burgundy dress who had eaten her spaghetti with the solemnity of a person honoring someone they loved. She thought, "I was there for that. And now I am here for this," she thought. That is enough. She started walking. Behind her, in the hotel, a woman named Lily Miller was answering questions about biomarkers and early detection, and the things that can be fixed and the things that cannot. And in every answer there was a thread running back to a Tuesday in December, a warm room against the cold, a father who had loved his daughter with everything he had, and a stranger who had seen it and decided that love like that deserved to reach as far as it could go. The snow, when it came, would be the same snow it always was, falling without preference, covering everything equally. The empty lot and the lit window, the grand hotel and the small trattoria, the face of the person who gives and the face of the person who receives. But for now, the sky was clear, and it was enough.